Hi, my name is Morgan. Hopefully, I will teach you lots about Florence County School District 4 versus Shannon Carter. So, the background of this case was Shannon Carter was a high schooler. She was going to the ninth grade, and she had been in District 4 for a while, and then switched out to another school and ended up coming back. And then when she was in high school, her parents had her evaluated for a learning disability, and they said that she did not have a learning disability. Later on, they did conclude that she had a severe learning disability, and her learning disability specifically was dyslexia and ADHD. And she was performing at a fifth grade reading level, and she performed at a sixth grade in math. So her IEP, they wanted to have objective long-range goals, and for her, that meant that she needed to improve 4 months in reading and 4 months in math in 1 year of special education. And she was going to be put into her own special class by herself. Of course, her parents had lots of issues with that because they didn't think that she should be put in a class with, at this time, what they considered completely mentally retarded kids or, very, very low functioning kids rather than just having a learning disability. So she and her parents both felt that she should be put into a private education in order to improve more than just 4 months in 1 year. I'm sure as you can do the math, improving 4 months in 1 year, you're getting, 8 months behind every year. So instead of improving, she's falling further and further behind in her different reading levels and her math levels. And her parents really wanted her to be able to graduate with a high school level of reading. More specifically, she wanted to be on grade level when she did graduate. So Shannon Carter and her parents ended up going to a due process hearing. And that's where you go whenever you can't agree on either an IEP or the placement. So Shannon Carter, her parents, and District 4 came to the due process hearing and a subsequent review. And District 4 felt like placing Shannon into the special ed classroom as well as the 4 months of progress in a year was free and appropriate education. Um, for whatever reason, they felt like that's where Shannon was and that's the best that Shannon could do. So her parents did ask to go to the federal court. Her parents decided that a good alternate placement would be a private school. They suggested to the District 4 to go either to District 1, which in this, in Florence County, or a couple different private schools. They ended up choosing a private school that specialized in learning disabilities. However, that private school did not meet the IDEA requirements. So they did, they took a big risk sending her to a school that didn't meet the IDEA requirements because they could not have been reimbursed, possibly. And so this school, since it did specialize in learning disabilities, had over a year's progress in 1 year of special education. So she was able to graduate with her class at the correct reading level. So this is what the courts will look at whenever we get into the federal courts and ultimately the Supreme Court of, the school provided her with a really great education that she would not have gotten over at District 4 in a classroom by herself and, only having the goal of, 4 months in 1 year. So the next step was to go to the U.S. District Court. So an expert at the court did look at Carter's test data, saw how she was not diagnosed for a learning disability before and then now was, as well as the severity of her learning disability. They also looked at some of the test scores and how much she should be able to improve, for each school year. And they found that the private school was very appropriate. They did charge a reasonable amount for the services. They looked at the tuition costs, food, room and board, all that good stuff, and how much it cost for her to come back home. And they understood that they did pay more than what they would have paid to go to District 4, but it was a better education. And saying that, they also found that reimbursement should happen. Florence County should pay um, her services over at that school. Her tuition, her room and board, everything should be paid for by the county because they were not going to give her a free and appropriate education. And she deserved that. So, like I just said, the IEP did not provide that free and appropriate education. So, moving her to a private school was in her best interest. And of course, the school district is not going to agree with that because now they have to pay, $30,000, I think, for the years that she was at that private school. So then we have to go into the Court of Appeals to try to satisfy the District 4 in this case. So at the Court of Appeals, Florence County argued that, first of all, 4 months progress was appropriate, as I mentioned before, as well as that special ed classroom. However, their new argument was that no reimbursement should be made because the private school was not on the approved list. Now, in the Supreme Court, the approved list becomes a little bit more important, but just kind of an overall gist is there's supposed to be an approved list of schools that if you're not happy with sending your child to a public school, then this list is of schools that you can be reimbursed if you go there. However, in Florence County and the surrounding state, there is no approved list. So that was kind of an interesting fact as well for you guys to know. And they also said that mainstreaming was in Shannon's best interest. And of course, mainstreaming is, being part of the public school system. At the Court of Appeals, the court decided that parents not satisfied can enroll their child in a private school, alongside going to the federal court and whatnot. And they also upheld the U.S. District Court's decision, as I mentioned, the reimbursement, and just, recognizing that Florence County was in the wrong in this case. So eventually this case made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. There was a unanimous decision in favor of Shannon and the Carter family. And they, just like in the other courts, they tested Shannon's ability and found that she was a lot more capable than what District 4 was giving her credit for. And they also found that District 4 had de minimis goals, which is just basically giving her the basic that they can get away with and still call it appropriate education. And they also agreed that tuition reimbursement should be received, especially if the public school doesn't give the free and appropriate education. And they called this a financial burden. However, they also realized that if a public school isn't willing to give that appropriate education, then that's a financial burden they should have to take on. The private school was found to be appropriate. Also, they found that the IEP was not adequate, and an adequate IEP to the Supreme Court advances the child from grade to grade. And as I'm sure you remember, 4 months of improvement in a year is not really advancing that child from grade to grade. They're just getting further and further behind. One important quote from the Supreme Court was from Justice O'Connor. They said, parents have a right to withdraw their child from a public school providing an inappropriate education under the meaning of IDEA and enroll them in a private school as long as the private school provides an appropriate education. The court further held that the specific requirements of the Act need not be met when a student is placed in a private school by his or her parents because the IDEA requirements were not intended to apply to parental placements. Part of the reason that she remarked this was because the school district was fighting that they didn't put Shannon in an appropriate school under IDEA, that they needed to pick a school off the list. However, there was no list for appropriate private schools, and it was argued that maybe Shannon's parents should have asked for the list or asked for where is appropriate that we can put her. But as I said before, in those due process hearings, they suggested 3 schools. And so at that point, the school district should have said, well, actually, this is where your daughter can go if you're not happy with where we're trying to put her. But District 4, of course, thought that their plan was appropriate, so, why tell her? And so, under IDEA, um, just being able to put your child in the best possible situation for them to excel, um, and not be held back just because the school isn't willing to give them appropriate education, but being able to choose to put them where they'll excel the most. So the impact of this court case was that, IEP goals must be realistic and attainable. Unfortunately for Shannon, 4 months in 1 year was just not realistic. It was below her intelligence, and to go to that private school that thought over a year in 1 year special education, that was realistic because Shannon had the intelligibility to make those goals. Also attainable, making sure that an IEP is one where when they meet the goals, they're still going to be moving from grade level to grade level to grade level, rather than being stuck behind over and over and over again. Of course, there's many students that can't, keep up with grade level because of a disability. However, just making sure that we recognize the difference between a kid that's not trying or a kid that um, hasn't been given enough attention, and the kids that really just they physically can't do that for whatever reason that is. And also, a consequence of this case is that a free and appropriate education should also get the child to college. Had Shannon had stayed at the District 4 school, she would have been at, a 6th grade reading level, or maybe a 7th grade reading level by the time that she graduated. And that's not going to get you into college. And we want to make sure that these students are going on to the next level and they're able to excel in life. Learning disability is not a reason to, not be able to go to college. So that was a mean impact that this case had. All in all, this was a really important case to understand exactly what an IEP should have and exactly what goals should be put on an IEP, and just making sure that we're encouraging our kids to, excel and achieve to their highest abilities. These are some of the places that I got my research, and if you want more information, feel free to visit them. Have a great day.